Good afternoon, Jamaica. Good afternoon, New York, because we broadcast not only here in Jamaica from the studios of Bridge 99 on Devon Road, but we broadcast as well through our sister station, JAMP in New York, so that we have at one and the same time both our resident audience as well as the diaspora in New York. This is Jamaica Live. I'm Bruce Golding. We do this every Monday between 12 and 2. It's a discussion program. It's not a call-in program. There are enough of those. It's a discussion program where we take an issue that we think is important, is of interest. We delve into it as deeply as we can. We invite people who can help us to better understand the issue to join us, as we will do today. And we try to see if we can broaden people's understanding of the issues and to enable them to form their own opinions, come to their own conclusions. That's what we're all about. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're on JAMP in New York. There is much discussion taking place on the matter of constitutional reform. The discussion traverses several issues. What are the current provisions in the Constitution? What is it that ought to be changed, and what changes should be made? As also, what is the process to be followed in effecting those changes? The Constitution we now have was enacted in 1962, just before independence. It was put together very quickly, in a matter of a few months, by a committee chaired by the late national hero Norman Washington Manley. It was never put to the people for approval. It was simply approved by the Jamaican Parliament. Now, a constitution that has been in existence for more than 60 years, especially one that was so hurriedly put together, is certainly in need of review to assess how well it has worked, to assess the extent to which it has served the interests of the people and enabled them to advance their lives and fulfill their legitimate aspirations. Times and circumstances have changed. Values and attitudes have changed. The world in which we live and with which we have to interact much more than we had to do in 1962, that has also changed. The need for a review was recognized from as far back as the 1970s, a little over a decade after independence. That effort didn't get very far. Another effort was made in the 1990s, and it made much greater headway. A Constitutional Reform Commission was set up, and it made several recommendations. And this is after it did a lot of public consultation. It had consultations in every parish. And it made several recommendations which were subsequently considered by a Joint Select Committee of Parliament. Now, that Joint Select Committee of Parliament submitted a report in 1995 setting out the issues on which agreement was reached and those on which they were not able to reach agreement. That was 28 years ago. During that time, only one of the agreed issues has been implemented. The one that I think was the most important issue, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, that I, as Prime Minister at the time, had the privilege of taking to Parliament and securing approval in 2010. Now, prior to that, which is why I think this is the most important of the constitutional changes proposed, prior to that, most of the rights that people enjoyed could be suspended by the government indefinitely and unilaterally. And not even our highest court could intervene. Under the new charter, any such action by the government can be challenged in court, and can be challenged in court by any ordinary citizen. And it is the government that would have to satisfy the court that its actions were demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Undergirding this important change is the fact that we have an independent judiciary that we can depend on to act fairly and justly. And you know, human rights activists in the United States are perhaps envious of us because they don't have that. Their judiciary is as political as they come because they're appointed based on their political views. And I don't mean just Republican or Democrat, but on their ideological views. We don't have that in Jamaica. One of the changes most talked about is doing away with the constitutional monarchy, which is what we are now, and becoming a democratic republic. And by so doing, replacing the Queen or the King, as we now have, with a Jamaican head of state. This has been agreed by both the government and the opposition, and I believe there is a majority approval among the public. I say majority approval because rather than consensus, because there are still some people, I don't know how many, but if you follow comments on social media, there are still some people who would prefer to retain the British monarch as our head of state. And you know, I don't regard this as backward thinking. I think it's understandable. The truth is that the Queen, or now the King, really has nothing to do with the operation of the Jamaican state. It is mere formality. Even though it was the Queen who formally appointed all our governors general, the Queen did so on the advice of the Prime Minister of Jamaica. It is the Prime Minister who chooses who should be the Governor General. And it is the Governor General who exercises the constitutional functions and authority of the Queen, like assenting to bills passed by Parliament, swearing in ministers and senators and judges and other public officers. This is the nub of the issue of moving to become a republic. We don't choose the King or Queen. That is established in Britain by birthright. You know, when Elizabeth dies, her eldest child becomes the new monarch. When King Charles dies, Prince William is going to become the new king. And nothing can change that. That's the nature of their system. We have nothing to do with that. But if we are going to have a Jamaican head of state, how should that person be chosen? You certainly don't want a system where, you know, Governor General Patrick Allen, if he were to become the president in a republic, then his eldest child becomes his successor. We're not into that. I don't like monarchies, neither in Britain nor in Africa. We have some in Africa as well. And we have some in Europe. I don't believe that the head of state should be determined by procreation. You know, man meets a woman, marries a woman, has a child, and that child automatically becomes my next head of state. Kind of rubbish that. What business that has being maintained in 2023? I'm not in that. One way of choosing the head of state, if we were to become a republic, is to have the system similar to what we have now in terms of how the Governor General is chosen, where the person is chosen unilaterally by the Prime Minister, whoever is the Prime Minister of the day. We have been fortunate that all of the Jamaican Governors General we have had up to now, Clifford Campbell, Florizel Glasspool, Howard Cook, Kenneth Hall, and Patrick Allen, have performed their duties in an exemplary fashion. but it is a risky arrangement. Over the last 40 plus years, the position of Governor General has evolved far beyond just the ceremonial duties and formalities. We have vested in the Governor General some critical executive functions, like deciding who should be the independent members of the Electoral Commission, who should be the members of the Integrity Commission, the Broadcasting Commission, the Political Ombudsman. This requires that the person who is making those decisions should display no political bias, but should be someone who is above the political fray, someone who would enjoy the trust and confidence of not just the government and opposition, but the trust and confidence as well of the wider public. How do we ensure that? Both political parties have long agreed that the head of state would be nominated by the Prime Minister after he or she has consulted with the leader of the opposition. But that nomination would be subject to a two-thirds approval by both houses of Parliament. The sticking point is how is that two-thirds majority to be taken. One proposal is that it should be a two-thirds majority in each house, voting separately. This would ensure that the person to become head of state would have to be supported by the opposition, because a two-thirds majority in the Senate can only be obtained if you have the support of the opposition. Another proposal is for the two-thirds majority to be taken of both houses sitting and voting together. The problem with that is that right now, and as has happened in the past, the government has such an overwhelming majority in the lower house, 49 seats to 14, that if you put both houses together to vote as one, the government would have a two-thirds majority. I mean, right now, for example, if you put both houses together, you're talking about 84. What is it? 63 plus 21, that's 84. To get a two-thirds majority of that, you need you need 56 votes. But if you put both houses together, the government has 49 plus 13. That's 62. So the government would be able to appoint whoever it wants as as president, and don't pay no attention to what views the opposition might have. I don't think that's the way to go. A third idea that I see coming from some members of the public, and you see this in social media, is that the head of state should be elected by the people. That is what is done in several countries like the United States. The problem with that is likely to end up with a JLP or PNP head of state. Because if you have to campaign to seek votes, how else can you be victorious without the support of the election machinery of the JLP or PNP? Is that what we want? Do we want a PNP president or a JLP president? Or we want a president who is a president for all Jamaica, who is neither PNP nor JLP, but someone who we can trust when things get tight, to hold the scales, to hold the balance. So, just to take the point a little further, when a JLP or PNP head of state is appointing the members of the Integrity Commission or the independent members of the Electoral Commission, who do you think they're going to appoint? And do we want an Electoral Commission that is there to ensure that our elections are free and fair? If those members are, the membership of that commission is dominated by JLP or PNP members. Now, there are several other provisions in our present constitution that need to be changed. For example, and many people are not even aware of this, a person can arrive here from Australia or New Zealand or any other Commonwealth country, live in Jamaica for 12 months, and can then be a candidate for Parliament. And if he wins his seat in Parliament, could very well end up as Prime Minister of Jamaica, although he only live here for 12 months. That is hardly ever likely to happen. But should that possibility even exist? Another idea is to increase the membership of the Senate to include independent voices so that the deliberations there are not left solely to JLP and PNP senators. Is that an idea we should embrace? Yet another proposal is for constitutional provisions to be made to impeach public officials who are found to be corrupt. Isn't that something that we should have? Then there's the issue of the process to be used to change the Constitution. Many people have expressed the view that before we go about changing the Constitution, the people of Jamaica should be fully consulted. This would involve both a program of public education so that people are fully aware of what the Constitution says, and then a program of public consultation so that people are given an opportunity to present their own views as to what changes should be made. A town hall meeting was held in Montego Bay last week. How many more town hall meetings will be held? What use will be made of the various media forums or the various media forms, including social media, to engage and educate the public so that they can offer informed ideas? There's also the issue of the level of public interest. Many people ask, how will constitutional reform make any difference to their daily lives? Many of the changes would have to be put to the people in a referendum. How many people will even bother to go out and vote? In the last couple of elections, less than half of the registered voters have turned out. If a referendum were held on the changes that should be made to the Constitution, I wonder how many people would bother to go out to vote on those changes. 20%? 15%? And how endorsed are constitutional changes that are approved by a majority of 15%, which can be as low as 8%? That's our issue for today, constitutional reform. What it means, how important it is, how urgent it is, and how we should go about it. And I'm pleased to have joining us to discuss this a noted, distinguished attorney and someone who has taken a great interest in matters to do with constitutional rights. I'm talking about Mr. Bert Samuels. Bert, do we have you on the line?
I am here. Great to be with you and on the bridge and with your listeners.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks for that. Big up.
They're hearing you in New York as well, so you better be careful what you say.
Okay, all right. I figured there are more of us there than here.
Okay. Bert, what you make of the renewed approach towards constitutional reform? Because this is not new. We have been through this before, and we have made some progress.
Yes.
But certainly not as much progress as I had thought when I was involved in the 1990s. What do you make of it?
All right, so I salute the Charter of Rights. Lawyers think it's revolutionary. It's been a great blessing. 2011, that was taken aside and dealt with as an issue, the rights of Jamaicans. And I tell you, we have made much use of the new charter, which is 12 years old. And so, yes, so I'm not going to be cynical and say that, every time we try, we didn't get it. But now we're talking about a wider...
Before you go further, Bert.
Yeah.
Is that charter under stress?
I've heard statements made from members of Parliament, members of the Senate that feel, and they're of the view that we have too many rights and we should suspend them liberally. And that's the threat I see to them. I should hope that no rights will be reduced. They are under threat. I'm going around the issue. Comments have been made by persons in high office about or being able to suspend some of those rights too liberally, I think.
Mm.
So, because remember, we have an arrangement, constitutional arrangement, that contemplates, in my view, the spirit of the Constitution, that the suspended rights would be for a state of emergency, which would be a 2-week clean-up, mop-up, and then we resume to our rights again. That has not been happening. So,
and even within the 2 weeks, it's still justiciable. You still can go to the court for a determination to be made.
Yes, but the drawback of that is there's habeas corpus is suspended. You know, you go to a non-judicial body for complaining that I have asthma, I'm not getting my medication. You know, so there's still problems within the states of emergency with the rights of citizens. I remember from where I sit, I see people with real great needs to go before a judge, you know. So
I had interrupted you. Return to where you were.
Yes, so I'm saying that in the past, and I celebrate 2011 Charter of Rights, good. And you said, is it under threat? Yes, it is, but we'll preserve it. So my first caution is, do not trouble the Charter of Rights except where you are widening the rights of the citizen. That's my first wish, that we don't do that. And some of the widening of those rights would be trial by jury for serious offenses. This is my agenda now, I make it clear. We should have trial by jury for serious offenses. Can I expand on that particular issue?
Sure.
In the constitutional arrangements we have, the Prime Minister effectively chooses the Chief Justice. The Prime Minister effectively chooses the Director of Public Prosecutions. Am I correct?
Yes, on the first.
Yeah.
On the second, it's really a Public Service Commission appointment. But I do share your view that the Prime Minister's view is heavily
can be carried. In fact, I know that when I've lived it, I've seen persons saying, from one political party or the other, Bert, what's your view about ABC being DPP? So I know that they canvass to me. So in other words, so my problem with that, if the head prosecutor is appointed either directly or indirectly by the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice, can you imagine a Prime Minister who becomes a rogue and decides to put his political enemies on trial, asking that his DPP makes a ruling for their arrest and then his Chief Justice tries the person? That's the problem I have with the arrangement, which is a step over from executive into judiciary and into the prosecutorial arm of the state. I fear that we could have, a very uncomfortable situation where political enemies are being, sought after by a Prime Minister.
Well, one way of guardrailing that. One way of guardrailing that is to be found in one of the recommendations that came out of the 1995 Joint Select Committee, and that is that the appointments would be made by the President, bearing in mind that the President would be chosen on a basis that would seek to ensure that that person is non-political. But it would be made on the basis of the President submitting a nomination to Parliament, and that nomination requiring a 2/3 in each house. So it's an issue that I remember that we addressed.
Let me ask you one question, Bruce. You don't mind this, right? The President remains irrespective of who wins the next election, right?
Yes.
So that's part of the checks and balances, that the President steps over into another regime.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful check and balance. You agree with me?
And whoever is appointed and whoever succeeds.
Yes.
This is up in the air now, but I mean, my own insistence would be that that person has to be approved by a 2/3 majority in each house, voting separately.
Voting separately. And I heard your conversation a while ago, and it must be separately because the Senate is designed in our structure to be a checks and balance for the lower house. So you can't merge them and get the checks and balance idea the way that it should be. But then again, we want to have an elected Senate too. Have you spoken to that?
I didn't speak to that, and quite frankly, I'm not in favor of that.
Okay.
Because that would be just an extension of the House.
Yes,
I believe that the Senate, I support the view that the Senate needs to be expanded to include some non-political representatives to give a voice to independent people.
How would that work? I mean, how would that work? Would it be the nomination of the opposition and the government for those extra senators?
No, the proposal that certainly the JLP opposition at the time had made, and I was a part of that,
Yeah.
was for those appointments to be made by the president in his own discretion.
Okay.
The PNP was of a different view. The PNP government was of the view that they should be made by any third party that had obtained more than, I think, 10% of the vote in the last elections, and if no such party obtained that amount, then it should revert to appointment by the government and the opposition, by the prime minister and the leader of the opposition.
Oh, so there are several models in these.
Yeah, there are different models. Yeah,
there are different models.
Yeah.
But I was anxious to go to the history. I mean, how much time do we have, Bruce? To talk about this is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm not cutting you off.
All right. So, but I'm going to another area now. My concern is the 1962 Constitution came about in a way that is now, with hindsight, extremely narrow. The representation was not of the people, and if you look at the history, I mean, Trevor Munroe wrote on it.
Yes.
It's that I gather that even when we did our thing down here, when it reached London, there were substantial changes to what we sent up. And the embarrassing thing to me as a Pan-Africanist is that when you look at the beginning of the Constitution, you see that it is made in Buckingham Palace. When you read the first page of the Jamaica Constitution, it says April 1962, by way of an order in council.
Signed by a guy named Agnew.
Yeah, you know, they just sent it down. It was made in the palace.
Yes.
Buckingham Palace. Now, because of that history, we should learn from it. And the request for inclusiveness and that the incubation period is too short, we should have months of public education. You alluded to it a while ago. We have an uninformed public, and we must firstly educate before we give them the chance to make a choice.
Yes.
And the agenda and the timelines that are now in place is going to cause problems. I think you know this, Mr. Golden. The timeline is going to cause problems.
Yes.
It's with undue haste for this document, which is so important. So that's one of my observations.
One of the things that I think we have to resign ourselves to is that even with the most robust public education and public engagement effort,
yes,
you're lucky if you get more than 2 out of every 10 Jamaicans to engage. But even if it's under 2 out of 10, we owe it to them to do that.
The effort. I think I'm agreeing with you, but history must show that the effort was made, right?
Yes.
It must do that. Because, and then I referred to the past where you had 10 public consultations for the 1962 Constitution. Can you imagine, Bruce, at that time what the literacy rate was? I mean, 1962, what was the literacy rate in Jamaica?
Yes.
Less than half of us could read and write.
Yes.
So here it is.
When I looked at the submissions, the truth of the matter is that the submissions came from the more intellectually elite sections of the society.
Yes.
Because the people at the bottom, not only because of their literacy level, but I don't think any serious effort was made to engage them even in a rural classroom, you know.
And that is so. But could you tell me the retention of the Queen?
Bert, hold for me. I have to take a break. Can you hold? I'll just come back to you.
Yeah, man, I'll hold.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We are on Irish Jam in New York as well. Haven't peeled up Beauregard yet. Boy, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Golden. How are you doing, sir?
So you're so quiet. How you never jump in and interrupt me?
No, that's not my style to interrupt.
That's not your style. How is New York?
Not to interrupt. New York is wet enough, sir. We've been having rains over the weekend. A lot of rains, especially the fact that it's Penn Relays weekend this past weekend, you know, so it was very chilly, it was very windy sometimes by Jamaica standards, of course, you know, but we must say hats off to all of our athletes who continue to make us proud. It was a very, very, very well weekend for a lot of Jamaicans and a lot of Caribbean people.
We continue to lead the world.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And I also want to tell you that, you know, our school, St. George's, you know, they were there, but also to let you know that your other school, JC, they did very well to win the 4x100
meters. They messed up in the 4x800, no?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Nice to hear you, Bo.
You too.
Hail up all the Jamaicans in New York for me.
I will do that.
We're talking about constitutional reform today. We're looking at the process. We're looking at the issues, those things that need to be changed, how we go about changing them, It's important. It's an important issue. And we have online with us noted attorney at law, Bert Samuels. Bert, you're back on?
Right there, right here.
We have another 7 minutes or so to go, Bert.
Oh, wow. Okay. But Bruce, that's an historical observation. You realize that the British have no written constitution.
Yes.
And there's a view that they didn't trust us, that we would manage our affairs without something in black and white. And therefore, but they have said that it's a mere codification of the United Kingdom unwritten constitution. It's a common law.
Well, in fairness to them, they have a custom and a tradition that has held.
It has held
up to now.
Yeah, I think I want to have a written document.
Yes.
I'm just saying that they operate, and your listeners.
You don't want to go to court with hearsay.
Yes, they operate with no written constitution. Although they had the Magna Carta and had us as enslaved people at one and the same time.
Yes.
Because they don't see us as humans. But let's move from that.
Well, they chop off a king's head some time ago because he messed up, no?
Yes. So their idea of rights had with it a racial component because our enslavement was years after the Magna Carta.
Just put it there for me.
But back to this discussion. What other area? I said trial by jury. I didn't hear you come through on that, and I was.
I don't have a fixed view of it. I've been giving serious thought to the views that I've heard expressed by the Chief Justice.
Yeah.
He seems to attribute much of the backlog in our court system to the trial by jury.
Yeah,
I don't know to what extent that is
never the measure of
so. But I will tell you, but I'm not yet ready to kind of delve into a deep discussion about it. I have concerns because of some personal experiences I've had.
Yes.
Of the extent to which juries can be corrupted, no?
Yes.
And I think
I also have experience on the other side. We've had a judge who was imprisoned for corruption.
Yeah. Except
there
that
are instances, but for us not to trust the people that 7 Jamaicans can be, to say, listen, we're going to take some money and leg of this man. That to me is fictional almost when they are randomly chosen. You're not going to get that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a trial recently where someone is alleged to have been bribing the other 11 and they protested. I mean, so I don't think that the checks and balance for the random selection of 12 or 7 Jamaicans has a serious concern for me that corruption.
I must tell you, Bert, I was on a jury once. This is my only experience. A coroner's jury, and they actually chose me as their foreman.
Yes.
And I was impressed at the just sheer common sense that was displayed by ordinary little Jamaicans.
Bruce, I wish you could say it 2 more times. Bruce, listen. When your daughter goes to Immaculate and then she goes to the law school and then she goes to the DPP's office and then she becomes a judge, you yourself would say, so she don't have much road experience at all. She's bright. So when she becomes a single judge, you are a politician. You know that what happens in a tenement yard, if you are upper middle class, you cannot understand that. So that's my problem. How did we reach here? Trial by jury, I want that. That's my big vote for serious offenses.
Yes.
And we said the timelines are too restrictive, and we said public participation, yes, and I hear you. You are in the political field. You know no matter how important an issue is, the apathy runs throughout the country. We're not interested in that. We're thinking about bread and butter. I mean, I'm not for the king or the queen. And then the retention of the Privy Council, we can't leave that one, Bruce. Do you think that we could ever think of constitutional reform without getting rid of the Privy Council?
Well, that's going to be not a fly in the ointment. It's going to be a dead rat.
It's crazy.
But the truth of the matter is that no constitutional change of any significance, apart from 1 or 2 little minor areas.
Yes.
No constitutional change can be made without some unanimity between government and opposition. If I understand Mark Golding properly, as he spoke in Parliament 2 weeks ago, he has said that, look, if this thing is to proceed, we need to deal with the question of doing away with the UK Privy Council.
Yes.
Now, if that becomes a deal breaker, then you're not going to have no deal.
Lord of mercy.
And what I said basically in an article some time ago, if that is the position, let us stop wasting time and money. Let us just shut down everything and say, well, we continue to argue and quarrel.
It cannot work. The Constitution is a three-armed fellow. He has three arms. You can't take one of his arms and keep it and then change the other two arms. Yes. I don't understand. I mean,
Bert, I mean, if you have followed my articles, I have recognized the value of the CCJ.
Yes.
I have taken the trouble, I'm not a lawyer, but I have taken the trouble to read many of its decisions.
Yes.
I'm impressed not only with the quality of jurisprudence as I can understand it,
yeah,
but I'm also impressed with how easy it is to read it.
Very right.
Right?
Very right.
No, that's my position.
But
I remember Mr. Seaga. I remember Mr. Seaga back in
institution that you're proud of.
Back in 2005. Mr. Seaga had said, I'm not opposed to it, but it's brand new and I don't know how it's going to work. Let us watch it and see how it works for the next 10 years and then we make a decision.
Right. So,
well, we're going about 15 or 16 or 17 years now.
Regional university.
Yes.
You're proud of the West Indies cricket team. Right? So both for fun.
Well, I'm not so proud of them anymore.
We are a region. The best minds coming from a pool of Caribbean countries is better than on this final court of appeal for Jamaica only. Yeah. That's crazy.
Well, we're going to leave it there, Bert.
My classmate, who is Guyanese, was a judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes.
I sat and studied with him. I know that the Guyanese make very good judges. For some reason, they have produced very good judges. So, I'm all for the CCJ, and you can't have three arms of government, and you pull in two and deal with them, and then the third one is kept in the same shape and form.
It's still tied to London.
Wow, I don't understand why we're not going. That's going to be problems. You've spotted a dead rat. You said it's not going to work.
Well. Bert, I gotta go. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks for the invite.
This discussion is not over, so keep your phone open.
Anytime.
Yeah, okay. Bert Samuel, noted attorney at law, Pan-Africanist, and serious human rights defender and advocate. We're talking about constitutional reform today and the process. We're hoping to be joined by Professor Trevor Munroe, who... Well, he was Executive Director of National Integrity Action. I just heard on the news this morning that he has resigned. He can perhaps bring us up to date on that. But significantly, he wrote a book many, many years ago on the initial constitutional process, the process that was used to put together the Constitution that we now have. And it's a very revealing to me in terms of how that Constitution came about, and perhaps the steps that were taken that we should avoid repeating. Professor Munroe, do I have you on the line?
I'm right here with you, Bruce. How are you?
I'm good. What is this? You're not at National Integrity Action anymore? That's breaking news.
No, that's not only breaking news, it's breaking misinformation.
Oh.
So I'm very much at National Integrity Action. The board, after having received my resignation, and you know what it is, Bruce, when you found and lead an organization for 11 years, you do think that it's time to pass the baton, at the same time as to continue to give support and to continue to advocate the good governance mission that NIA is about, and that's where I am now, Director of NIA, very active, supportive of our new talented Principal Director, Daniel Archer, but not going anywhere, not riding off into the sunset.
Good. Constitutional reform. You know the ins and outs going all the way back to 62. You know the failed efforts of the 1970s, the renewed efforts of the 1990s, which made some headway. Didn't make a lot of headway in terms of implementation apart from the Charter of Rights. The renewed attempts now. Are we doomed for failure again?
We are really at a crossroads, Bruce, and I suggest that the Constitutional Reform Committee needs to make a fundamental change in its way of going about this process. Otherwise, what you are risking is what I think Bert and yourself were talking about, a very low voter turnout with an even lower percentage of a majority in favor of whatever the question is. So when I say a fundamental change in the approach, we need immediately for the committee to open up its sittings. In fact, the process should be live streamed in the way that joint select committees of Parliament are. Anybody can watch important conversations regarding whether a bill in Parliament should be modified and the direction of its modification. The Joint Select Committee receives submissions from the people, and those submissions are live streamed again. The committee needs to completely transform itself in the way it has been proceeding. There have been 5 or 6 meetings.
Was there a commitment that will be done, Trevor?
I have heard that it will be, but we need a date, because we're being told, subsequent number of interviews by our co-chair of the committee, Minister Malahoo-Forte, that the bill that will embody the question to go before the people in a referendum is going to be tabled this very month. And looking at the social media interventions and comments and letters to the Gleaner and editor, people are very concerned about. In fact, one of them said, look, the question I want to see go to the people in a referendum bill is the following. Do you support a presidential or ceremonial or an executive president? Question. So people are having views without the benefit of watching, hearing, getting information on the discussions in the Constitutional Reform Committee, and more importantly, as you pointed out very well in your opening, not having any basic education on the terms that are being used. What is the difference between a ceremonial and an executive president?
You know,
Do
Trevor,
we really have a presidential, a ceremonial governor general? These are issues that have to be explained fully across the country.
I agree with you, but you know, part of the conundrum that we find ourselves in, and you would know better than me or anybody else, because you have studied this thing so much. The people who put together our Constitution put so much shackles on it, padlocks, that for you to change the fundamental sections of the Constitution, it's not a matter of going to the people and saying, do you want a ceremonial president or do you want an executive president? You have to put to the people the actual bill. Now, you may not set it out on the ballot paper in its entirety, but you have to provide a bill to which the ballot refers and says, do you support the provisions in bill name so and so and so and so? It is the actual bill that, having been approved by a 2/3 majority in both houses of Parliament, it's the actual bill that the people have to vote on, not just an indicative referendum as was the case in 1961 with the West Indies Federation. So it makes it very complicated.
Very complicated, and unfortunately so, because what you just said, 1 out of every million Jamaican people are aware of that. And that's what I mean by public education. There needs to be an awareness of that shackle so that folks will understand to get out of the shackle, you need to make changes in the amendment process. Yeah. And to do that, you need a bill. Now, the bill is apparently being drafted. Can that bill be put publicly before us now? And if not, why not? So that we can see the bill in the way that we see any other bill.
Well, there's a view, and I'm going to query this with the minister when she joins me in a little while. There's a view that before you draft the bill, you must hear from the people what they want to go into the draft.
Yes, and that is a view that has much substance, particularly because, Bruce, of the level of distrust and the tendency, with some justification, for people to believe that what's being done behind closed doors is very much a fait accompli, particularly if both sides agree on it before it actually is tabled. Now, fortunately, there is much experience where when bills are drafted and they are put before the public and public hearings are held, with submissions being entertained by organizations like JAMP, NIA, and so on, changes are in fact made. But that's a process that cannot, I emphasize cannot, based on experience, be completed within a couple of months. And it must be very clearly said that whatever bill is put that may not be revealed to the public before it is actually tabled, that bill must be subject to amendment in the course of public interchange and public discussion.
Trevor,
so that is number one.
Trevor, let's take a break. I want to put a question to you when we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. And we're broadcasting not only on Bridge 99 here in Jamaica, we're broadcasting as well through JAMP in New York. We're talking constitutional reform today. We have online Professor Trevor Munroe, who is one of our recognized experts on this particular matter. Trevor, I wanted to put a question to you. How much sympathy do you have, because I have some, for those who contend that the wider you open the public engagement and participation and discussion, is the harder it is going to be to keep the issue on the rail, because you're going to end up with already, for example, I see some people saying we should have an elected president without, I think, giving serious thought to what the implications of an elected president is and how the entire system of government would have to change. I see some proposals on social media, for example, certainly one that says that anybody found with an illegal gun and found guilty should be executed within 14 days, and they want that in the Constitution. How do you, you end up in such a wide range of ideas, some of them well thought out, some of them very shallowly thought out. That the business of trying to arrive at consensus on a package becomes almost impossible. Isn't that a real difficulty?
A real difficulty it is, yes, and precisely for the reason that we've been discussing earlier on. If you don't use all the multimedia channels that are available now, far more than the 1990s, or certainly no comparison with 1962, to explain, one, how can this constitution be changed? How can it not be changed? Two, what is a president? What is the executive president? What is a ceremonial president? Three, what are the pros and cons of the system we have now plus another system? It don't need to be put in complicated language, Bruce. I was just looking back at 2 chapters of my book for first-year students at the university, chapter 9 and 10, on the difference between parliamentary and presidential, and the pros and cons of each. Pretty clear, pretty easily set out. But if you don't do that, what you're going to run upon is exactly what you just said. People don't like the way politics is going on. They don't like the lack of accountability. They don't feel that they have any control over the elected representatives. Feelings that are justified very often in the way our politics has evolved. Hence, you get 38% of the electorate voting last time. So I think when I said a fundamental change in the methodology of the Constitutional Reform Committee, what I meant is exactly right now, not tomorrow or the day after, to publish simple language. Some of those ads I see going on the television every night, you can't forget the message because it's repeated, it's clear, it's simple, even though the ad may be expressing complicated ideas. We have multimedia channels now. So beg you, start with those things that can clarify where people are going now. What they're saying is, it don't make sense to have a man who will be president as same as the GG don't know nothing. How will the people move him if we don't like him? All of those issues arising from a politics that has gradually left the people out in terms of civic and public education. We need to start now. That is what will give us the chance to be able to understand why this process had to go in stages. Now, if I don't trust you, and you tell me the first step is to have a president in place of Governor General who will be chosen in effect by both sides of the House, and there's nothing in the bill itself to say that the next step we're going to be looking at is impeachment proceedings. The next step we're going to be looking at is the right of recall. The next step we're going to be looking at all of those things that people feel strongly about. We'll give them more power, more constraints on the executive.
But I'm not sure that people.
Then I think we're going to be in trouble.
I'm not sure that people are going to buy in on next step because that's a promise.
They want everything now.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
can I raise a tactical issue with you?
Sure.
Based on all my experience, if I had to do this thing before I make the first step, before I set up any committee, I would have sit down with the PNP and say, listen, we'll talk about constitutional reform. What are the areas that you are prepared to examine and come to some agreement on? Because the way in which our framers structured the thing, if you don't have a bill that gets the support of both government and opposition in Parliament, then the government can still go to the people with it, but that time you need 60% majority. No vote has ever recorded 60% in Jamaica. So nothing can fly unless the government and opposition agree. And I have a difficulty if you're proceeding on the basis where you don't know. When I heard Mark Golding in Parliament, I got the impression, although there was still some room for escape, I got the impression that if the CCJ is not in it, then nothing going to fly. No consensus going to be arrived at. In which case we're wasting time because the JLP government doesn't seem to be prepared to include any CCJ in this exercise.
Bruce, when we're confronted with similar conundrum, to use that word, there's a similar insoluble difficulty. You remember in the late 70s, what happened? Both sides got together and said, look, we're looking over a precipice. It can't go on. But they also included, as you will recall, the civil society groups that were very active at the time, which included the church, the private sector, etc. And that is how we got the predecessor of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, which remains a state-of-the-art process and institution admired by democracies across the world and puzzled as to how we did it. And the way we did it is by both sides coming together, but not excluding the voices that are not necessarily captured in both political parties. And right now it is more voices that are not captured, and bring them into a way of arriving at broad outlines. Public education, a defined time for it, a bill that's going to come, and going into a consultative process that allows people to feel that if not all their concerns are being met immediately, in the short term,
but those voices,
are
Trevor,
going to be met.
Those voices, Trevor, are not at any unanimity yet. I mean, if you look at media, for example, the Gleaner is fully in support of the CCJ. The Observer not so, or not so much so.
And this is where majority is going to rule. It can't be that you're going to get 100% support for anything the proposition, but if you have a position where you say, look, for the next 2 months or 3 months, we're going to put some materials out, multimedia channels, to give people an understanding of what these terms mean. 2, in the course of that, we're going to be consulting. So that when the ministers ask a question, for example, at the first public consultation, as to what the job description of the new president is going to be, and she answers quite honestly that that's a very important issue, but we haven't come to it yet. That is what people want to have been having prior education regarding, as distinct from a president who is ceremonial, who is a president that is executive. And do we really have a ceremonial president or governor general? No.
We're running out of time. One of the things, and let's celebrate on it because we perhaps have to return to it some other time, but much as we have to have the consultation, might it not be better to try and keep the package of reforms as limited and as simple as possible, just to try and get the consensus that we want? The wider you extend it, is the more room there is for difficult. 1995 is more than 20 years ago. I don't want to spend another 20 years on this thing.
Agreed with you, but the timetable must be subject, Bruce, especially in our challenging times now. The timetable must be subject to education and consultation. It must not be open-ended. It's not going to take 20 years, but it cannot be that it is subject to the next general election. It has to be, the question has to be, how long can it reasonably take to get substantial education on the basic terminology and the basic proposal? We set a time for that, put the education in, and we don't keep it open-ended till 2093, but we do it in a time that allows people to have their voices heard, and we simplify the question that comes, but only after people understand the reasons why it is simple and a commitment that other issues are going to come very soon after to deal with empowering the people more substantially and holding authority to account better than it is now.
Got you. We're out of time. Thank you so very much, Professor
And
Trevor Munroe.
Keep up the good work, Bruce.
Good.
This is very important.
We take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We were with Irish Jam in New York as well. They would have left us a few minutes ago. Today we're talking about constitutional reform, talking about what it is intended to achieve, why is it necessary, and how do we go about it. And we're very pleased, very privileged to have in studio with us the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Now, today's Cabinet Day, so I hope she hasn't put her job at risk by being here. Welcome, Minister Malahoo-Forte.
Thank you, Prime Minister Golden. Good afternoon to your listeners.
Tell me, I've been involved in this process before, and one of the things that I learned is that it is so, what's the word? It is so delicate, it is so subject to derailment that a couple of things. If you start off with the basis, and I've heard you acknowledge this publicly, that nothing can practically go to the people unless government and opposition agree, because they require the 2/3 in the Senate.
Right.
You can still go to the people, but you need 60%, and you're not going to get that, no matter how noble the proposal is. Now, if that is the case, would it not have been a better approach, before you even open your mouth publicly about constitutional reform, to work out some understanding with the opposition?
Yes.
These are the issues we're prepared to take up.
Yes.
This is where we're prepared to go. When I heard the leader of the opposition in the House 2 weeks ago, I got the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that he was saying is that there can be no consensus unless we deal with the CCJ. If that is the opposition position, and the government has not yet committed itself to replacing the Privy Council, then aren't you all wasting time? I mean, focus your attention on legal affairs rather than constitutional affairs.
So many questions to be answered. If you just permit me to step back. A conversation took place in the context of the Vale Royal talks. It's not my place to discuss what took place privately. But arising out of those talks, there was an understanding that we would proceed, and the work would proceed in phases. The changes that the nation is calling for, those are changes that can only be made by a change in the Constitution. And the issues that require the approval of the people, not just any person, but the electorate, because that is what the Constitution specifies, are changes that are set. I don't choose them, members of the public don't choose them. I'm talking about a constitutional referendum now. Those matters are set. You are right that there are many things that are to be changed, but on which there is no consensus. And the understanding we proceeded with was to start with the matters on which we had consensus. So the occasion of the 60th anniversary of Jamaica's independence provided an opportunity to reflect. Out of that reflection, a number of things became clear. So the now heir apparent, the Prince of Wales, came to represent his grandmother, who was our head of state. And then grandmother died, and the throne has gone to son King Charles, now King Charles III. Out of that reflection and series of events, we began with the understanding that there was consensus on changing the head of state from the monarch and taking the monarch out of the makeup of the state and creating the office of president. As you know, the republican form of government emerged as an alternative to the monarchy, and that is where we start. We recognize that there are many things that need to be changed, but consensus has not yet been arrived on all those things. So we say, let us start with the things on which we have consensus. And there was no disagreement between the opposition and the government that abolishing the constitutional monarchy, there was no disagreement on that. The matter of the final court is not a matter that you require a referendum to change. So the simple logic is, based on how the provisions of the Constitution are categorized by virtue of the level of protection and the process by which you change them, we would begin with those matters that you need a constitutional referendum for.
Except that the leader of the opposition
Yes.
seems as if he's using it as a bargaining chip.
It does appear so, and the opposition had never been shy in the discussions to make it clear about where they stood on the matter. And Prime Minister Holness and myself, among others, from the government team, along with the leader of the opposition and his team, we had straight talk, plain talk about the issue. And Prime Minister Holness indicated that we will, if we have consensus on this, we will start, and then we face the work.
So what you're
Yes.
saying is that you're seeking to extract from the deliberations those
Yes.
matters on which consensus exists
Yes.
to proceed with those.
Yes.
One of the difficulties, or one of the things that we faced back in the 1990s,
Yes.
and I remember Mr. Siaga was very, very aware of it, and so was I, was that the issue of removing the head of state, removing the queen and replacing it with a president, that by itself didn't, in our view, generate a great deal of public
Right.
enthusiasm. And therefore, we felt that we had to look at other issues which needed to be looked at.
Yes.
One was the question of Charter of Rights, because prior to the Charter of Rights, the government could unilaterally just dispense with people's rights, and no court could interfere. So we looked at the Charter of Rights. We looked at things like impeachment provisions. We looked at things like entrenching, so that nobody can mess with it, provisions for the Electoral Commission, and so on. We felt that we had to package
Yes.
it with some things that people would say, no, I want that.
Yes.
I don't really care whether it's president or queen, but I want this.
Yes.
Don't you run a problem if you go with a referendum? And I want to come back to you again in terms of the technicalities of the referendum. If you go with a referendum that it kind of dry and so.
So, I've listened to the anecdotes, and I've looked at the writings about the shyness of successive governments in Jamaica to go to the referendum, even when consensus was reached on it. What the logic of the approach was, as you say, look at all of the issues that the Constitution say you can only make the change. Parliament alone can't make the change. The government side of Parliament alone can't make the change, because you need both sides to agree. And then it has to be approved. The change has to be approved by the electorate. From the menu of items set out in Section 49 of the Constitution are some interesting matters. So if you permit me to just tell your listeners, in no particular order. So the process by which the Constitution is changed itself can only be changed by a law where the people approve it ultimately. Some things are so deeply hidden that you wonder whether there was any intention to change it. Our constitutional amendment process is designed to be slow and technical. And difficult. So that is one of the many provisions. Another has to do with the establishment of the Parliament, comprising the monarch, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Of the three, changing out the monarch for a Jamaican head of state is not by itself contentious, because people are saying, if not now, when? But issues have arisen about the Senate. Many issues have arisen. Should the Senate...
Let me interrupt you.
Yes.
Look at social media and look at the number of people who are now saying, I want to retain the queen, and since she's not around anymore, give me the king.
Yes.
I can't quantify it.
Well,
no?
may I tell
but
you?
that sentiment has always existed.
Yes,
no?
but I say to the people, it's not a done deal. You ask for reflection. You tell the government that, look, 60 years of political independence, more need to be done to complete the circle of independence. And we're moving to take one of the steps. And some say, look, man, I'm not so sure I want to go down that road. We will have to have a conversation with
and I believe to
his monarchs,
with
his Majesty's government about what that relationship will look like.
I believe
forward.
in a vote, the majority would particularly because the Queen is no longer here.
Yes, yes. So the establishment of Parliament, the Senate itself is one of the issues that you can't change how the Senate is without going to the people, as you know. The Constitution says 13 members are appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, 8 on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. 2 primary views have come out of that. 1, they want the Senate to be elected, and 2, they don't think that the Senate should be a check.
Minister,
I'm just telling you that's so much.
Norman Manley, he was the chairman.
Yes.
I think Donald Sangster was the vice chairman of the committee that put it together in 1962.
Yes.
And they have been criticized because it is claimed that they locked themselves up in a room and they work it out in a couple of months and flew to London with it and got it approved up there. The truth of the matter is, if you look at the Constitution, it has flaws, no? And we have a duty to correct those flaws. Yeah. But if it was open to all and sundry to come in with their penny worth, I'm not sure what it would have meant to Jamaica's progress over 60-odd years if we had an elected Senate.
May I say something
rather
on
than
that?
the safeguards that Norman Manley and Donald Sangster put in.
May I say something on that? So one view is that not everyone who is willing to make a contribution through the parliamentary process wants to go through an election process. And do you exclude those? But in trying to answer those who have put out the view that the Constitution was made in secret, it's not quite borne out by the record, that we have checked. It's one view, and one view that attempts are being made to make it mainstream.
That did invite
just bear with me, sir. So in 1961, the literacy rate was almost 70%. All right? And the media landscape was completely different from what we have now. We didn't have social media. There was one main newspaper, 2 or 3 other papers, 1 radio station. And the main organs of social organization, including the church, those were dominated by the colonialist. So we were left with the political parties, trade unions, print media, farmers' organization. I'm told that you had from the People's National Party Vernon Arnett, director of the Public Opinion Progressive paper. You had Neville Ashenheim from the Gleaner. You had Rudolph Burke from the Agricultural Society. You had Howard Cook, who later became Governor General, organizing the teachers. You had Douglas Fletcher, who did a host of things. You had a J.P. Giles in agriculture. You had Iris King, who was the only woman and mayor of Kingston. You also had D.C. Tavares, Siaga himself, Willow Isaacs, Lightburn, Sangster, all the young, bright minds of the time coming together. Claude Stewart from the agricultural sector. And aside from agriculture and the political arena, the unions representing the masses were led by Manley and Buster. So the question is, who else would you have consulted with the literacy rate being as it is? Because the fight is a different landscape than we have now. And I heard you when I was coming over to studio remarking on the context in which the Constitution was made. And I'm just wondering whether those who are espousing the view about the secret nature of it and who are helping to shape public opinion, where there is a lot of ignorance, perhaps could use it a little differently. Because I've said, and I will say again, nothing in the process of lawmaking or constitutional breaking or making can be done in secret. Absolutely nothing. And in particular, the changes that we're seeking to make, ultimately they have to be approved by the people. There will be nothing to go to the people if the two sides of Parliament are not agreed on it.
Yeah, I think the concern has been that the people want an input in terms
Yes.
of what is approved by Parliament
Absolutely.
to go to the people.
Absolutely. And I don't think that is an unreasonable or
It's
unfair.
not unreasonable, it's just that...
The workability.
I mean,
Yes.
before the end of the program, I'm hoping to have on Carol Narcisse and
Yes.
Robert Stevens. And one of the issues I want to put to them, because I know they have concerns, is how do you keep the process on track? Because, I mean, I've been in politics. You go to a PTA meeting, you go to a citizens association meeting, and you're dealing with a problem.
Yeah.
You get some ideas that are so off the wall, you know.
Well,
That, you know, sometimes I say, look, I came here to try and see if I can get a solution, but in a confusing way.
Well, I have been utterly confused. So let me tell you, I went on one of the programs and I had to share with the host that I thought it was so unhelpful because there was a predetermination that nothing good can come from the process. And what I heard being called for is that you must just throw it out to the public, make no presentation to them, don't tell the people anything. And I'm saying, but we take it for granted that the people actually know what needs to be changed because those things are set out in the Constitution.
What happens if you have town hall meetings and you get an overwhelming view that, you know, people found with illegal firearms should be executed publicly in Half-Tree Square? I mean, do you say, well, that's the majority view?
Hold on, Mr. Golding.
You know?
You talk about town hall. At the very end of our first town hall, not the first public consultation, but the first one in that form that we had last Wednesday in Sam Sharp Square, it went over because we had a full auditorium and people were outside. When we were coming to the end of the program, the very end of the program, already going into overtime, someone asked a question about what the form of presidency was. I began by referring, so if I tell you that the head of state is supposed to embody national unity and be above the partisan politics, and I ended because I was being rushed, given the cue to wrap up because we were already out of time. And I said, very good question. We will have to come back to you on it. Somebody has packaged that out of context, putting it out to give the impression that we have no answer to that question. Really unfortunate, because are we trying to help? Whose agenda and interest is being served in a context where people glorify ignorance? The matter is technical, and if you tell them it's technical, some want to tell you that you are telling them that they have no sense. Even lawyers disagree about the law. Even lawyers who are trained in the law do not all know the Constitution and the working. For many, it's an academic document. For people like me, given the roles I've served, it's a living, breathing instrument that I've had to interact with every single day.
Two things, Minister.
Yes.
One, Professor Munroe was on earlier.
Yes.
And he keeps harping on this issue. Why are the meetings not live streamed? What's the difficulty?
We're going through a process. And if people are so interested in event and forget that there is a process. We have brought together representatives of different groups in society. We have to begin by sorting out the work. We have to develop the internal coherence within the committee. We have to get an understanding of how we are working together before we go to public. So it's just the first days.
Joint select committees have that same challenge, but we can go on television and watch them and hear what they're saying.
But
they have to sort out their work. They have to determine what are the issues they're going to focus on, and then they start discussing.
You know what would have been more helpful?
The thing is,
you know what would have been more helpful? You pose a question. Are the deliberations meant to be in secret? Is it possible for you to open them out and let us answer? Instead of just jumping to conclusion. Day 1 and day 2, because we're going to make available the records of the meeting. We're archiving them and we have the minutes. When those minutes are published, and you can check just in case the suspicious mind may think that we have doctored it because we have verbatim transcript being taken, that we spent the first 2 meetings actually talking about how we are going to engage the public.
But bear in mind, Minister,
yes.
that the criticism is still made even today.
Yes.
That the 61 committee,
yes,
they met in secret.
Yes.
They issued a one-page bulletin after every meeting.
We're not in secret.
But that criticism is still being made, 62 years later. And I'm just saying,
yes,
So as to remove all
Open it up.
all
That's something
suspicion
that's something
and
we're
all
considering.
mischief.
Yes.
Just open it up.
Yes.
You know?
But who's to say that anybody is against that submission
Well,
or
let's
that
do it, Minister.
suggestion? No. On
The second
Wednesday's
issue-
meeting is
the second issue I
Yes.
want to raise with
Yes.
you is I raised it before, but at some point in time, the government has been quite forthright in setting out the issues that it considers ought to be addressed. No?
Mm-hmm.
I think the opposition needs to be called upon to do the same,
Yes.
so that you don't waste time.
Yes.
Now, the opposition needs to decide whether or not it will continue its pursuit of establishing the CCJ as our final court, knowing that that needs no referendum. That's a 2/3 majority in both houses,
Yes.
but the government has not signed on to that. They will continue discussions, via or wherever, but they will still pursue
Yes.
the question of revising the Constitution. In other words, what I don't want to see is for you to spend 6 months, a year, 18 months
Yes.
going through this, and at the end of the day, the opposition says, well, look, if this is not done,
Yes.
not that whether this should be in it, because the CCJ
Right.
wouldn't be in it.
Right.
If this is not done before,
Yes.
we're not going to agree to it. Then we'd have wasted a lot of time.
You are
We'd have annoyed the public, and we would have parked it now for another 20 years.
You are a wise man, sir. So I think that the suggestion is well made. Since there will be nothing to go to the people if there isn't a 2/3 vote in the
But
parliament.
it seems to me that requires Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition
yes.
to sit down together and say, now, where is this thing going?
I am
If
going-
it's not going anywhere, let's stop wasting the people's time.
I am going to take back from this meeting, because I had to seek the Prime Minister's permission to step out of cabinet, a suggestion, as I understand the point that you're making, that before we proceed any further, we should have a meeting at the highest level to determine whether there is going to be consensus to send something to the people.
And that meeting don't need to be streamlined.
And if there is going to be no consensus, then it's a waste of time because we did not set the process by which the change is to be made.
No, it's in
That's
the
something we
Constitution.
have inherited, and this is a constitutionally supreme jurisdiction. So it's a point well made. The other thing that I have taken away from the concerns raised, is what meaningful consultation can take place between now, meaning when the committee started its work, and the indicative timeline for tabling the bill. How much can be done? People have gotten impatient, forgetting that this is a new era, that the issues are not new issues. We didn't choose the issues. I've heard you said publicly that it would be a shame to waste all of the work that was done before. So much was done. I want the public to understand that the change that we say we desire about completing, furthering the step towards independence, can only be made by changing the Constitution. And the Constitution sets out a process.
Yeah.
Talking about the change is not going to make it happen unless the law goes through Parliament, is agreed to by both sides. If it's not agreed to, nothing is going to go to the
Now,
people.
Minister, can I say respectfully and humbly,
Yes.
I think the most important change was the one we were able to do back in 2010, no? The Charter of Rights.
Yes.
I think that is even more important than
Right.
whether we have king or president.
Right.
Next to that, my view is that the next most important change would be to address Section 49
Itself. Yes.
itself, because right now we can't entrench, and I'm not talking about deeply entrench, we
Yes.
cannot give constitutional protection to the Electoral Commission
Yes.
without amending 49. And you can't touch 49 without a referendum.
Right. Right.
Now,
That's
what that means,
Spot on.
what that means is that
Spot
a
on.
government could go tomorrow to Parliament and bring a bill to abolish the Electoral Commission.
But we
we don't want that.
Prime Minister Golding, you are spot on. And when I say to people that the process is complex, some read that to mean talking down to people. But the point you just made exemplifies it. It is a complex process, and some of the changes that we need to make can only be made by changing that process, and it can't be changed until you go to the people.
That's right.
No, I didn't make it, I didn't design it, but I've heard interesting stories about why it was done that way and what was the fear that was operating at the time when Jamaica was becoming an independent nation. I'd say to the listeners, look, there are many things that need to be addressed. I hear the frustration. In fact, the minute you begin a process, people want to be heard on any and everything. As you have rightly said, if we don't keep focus, we will go off rails. This doesn't mean that the other issues being raised are not legitimate issues, that they do not require a response from government. The political directorate is not all of government. Government is not a one-man show. And every time people place all of the problems at the feet of the electorate, which are not properly to be placed there, because there are many issues that are properly to be placed there that are not placed there. Those who are in position to respond. Some are saying, look, I don't have to do anything, because when you come under pressure, it's not me coming under pressure. The spotlight is shone in one place and they are in the shadow. So I know that people are frustrated with government. The bureaucracy has not served them well. The face of government that they see at any given time is going to be the face of the person who is discharging the functions of government, the people they are dealing with. If you go to the tax office and you're met with a courteous clerk, polite, efficient, you go away with a good feeling. If you're met with someone who is rude and inefficient and speak to you badly, you're going to go away with a bad feeling. There are many, many issues. But we will not get to change the system without making this first change. Minister. And you are right, if you permit me another moment, when you say you hear the ask. The ask is for pieces of a system that is not fully understood, the presidential executive presidency system. And then if you tinker with it and you put a little piece and you don't know how it's going to work in an overall, you may end up with more problem. So where we start on the road is by no means going to be the end of the road. But people are a little suspicious. They probably don't have the faith that when you start a journey, you're going to continue to make the steps.
Minister, I know you have to get back to Cabinet. Let me thank you for, not just for coming on, but for joining me in studio. Your contributions have been very instructive. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Thank
Minister
you for...
Malahoo-Forte, Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. We take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking about constitutional reform today, and we just had a discussion with the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Minister Marlene Malahoo-Forte. We're very pleased to be joined now by Mr. Robert Stevens. He's a spokesperson for the Advocates Network, and we're hoping to be joined as well by Mrs. Narcisse, who is the Deputy Chairperson for the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. Do we have her online? We have both of them online. Robert, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
Well.
Carol, how are you?
I'm very well, Mr. Gooding. You?
I'm good. Tell me,
Yes.
starting with you, Robert, you have expressed some concerns about the process that is being used to examine possible changes in the Constitution. In a nutshell, what are those?
Well, we would like to see a lot more involvement of the people of Jamaica. You know, there's been very little exposure of exactly what is in the current Constitution. And number two, inviting students from universities, students from high schools, people generally, the churches. You know, we need to get as many people involved in the discussions as possible, because many people don't even understand what is in the Constitution. And it is important that we have a look at what is there and determine what we would like to see strengthened and what we would like to see improved. And some of it needs to be thrown out and replaced by things that are far more beneficial to the people of Jamaica.
Carol, is there not a danger if we proceed on the basis of this kind of unbridled, unscoped approach? The concern I want to express is based on two things. One is you end up with a whole heap of off-the-wall ideas being presented and being presented quite passionately. You know, like hanging people who are found with an illegal gun in Half-Way Tree Square. And secondly, Nothing can happen unless there's a bill passed in Parliament with a 2/3 majority in both houses, which means that nothing can go to the people. Quarrel with it if you want, but that is what the Constitution says. In Switzerland, the people themselves can initiate a constitutional change. But in Jamaica, nothing can be put to the people to change the Constitution unless government and opposition agree. And therefore, ought we not to recognize that, as unhappy as we might be in doing that, but to see to what extent we can engage in discussions with the government and opposition to see, what would be the terms of this constitutional amendment process that we're talking about, because ultimately the two of you have to sign to it.
Yeah, I think that we have to start off with an agreement about what is this project we're on. If we are on a project to create a constitution that is of the people, for the people, in large part defined by the people and what they say their aspirations are and what they say their 60 years of experience, those of us who have been around since independence and younger now, what it is that their experience of the world, what obtains in other parts of the world, etc., what that experience is leading them to think would be perhaps a better way to organize Jamaica. So the question is, whose constitution is this? If it's a constitution, then it requires more than the opposition and the government coming to consensus. Whilst they are elected representatives, they are not given the license to decide for and speak for the population in isolation of the population itself and in perpetuity, at least for the life of the parliament. So whose constitution, so when you set up a process, and if you decide that you're setting up a process that you want to have really deeply be owned by and identified with by the population, then you set up your process in a particular way. One, you are transparent with what the terms of reference for the process is, and you open the terms of reference to feedback. Two, you are transparent about how you are organizing what's the plan for consultation? How is it going to be organized? And how will people be able to contribute? You make that known from the start so people can get themselves ready. And then you have very specific questions that you put to the public, and you provide information about each of those questions so that people can make an informed decision. So, for example, doing away with the monarchy. Question one, do you want us to do away with the monarchy? Well, that question has been asked, and we think it's safe to say that most people are in agreement with us moving the monarchy as our head of state. The big next question then becomes, what should we put in its place? What are the different models? What are the pros and cons of those models? Can we fashion a hybrid that suits us best? So you would have those very specific questions. You provide the information, you engage people in discussion, you invite submissions, and you come to a sense of what are most of the responses, whether in written submissions or in consultations that you hold, not just in public writ large, but also in particular sectors of the society. So amongst trade unions, amongst professional associations, amongst youth, so that you get a sense of what the different sectors' views might be. So it's a very organized approach, but it's grounded in an intention that you want to really deepen the power that people have, the voice that people have, and the ability of the nation as a whole to define the next 60 years and what we want Jamaica to be like.
But can you properly manage that consultation? Can you keep it focused without defining the parameters, setting an agenda, Robert? I was part of I was a member of the Joint Select Committee that considered the recommendations of the Constitutional Reform Commission in 1995. And one of the things that struck me, and not me alone, others as well, was that while the removal of the Queen as our head of state was kind of top of the agenda, we realized that didn't really create no excitement out there in the public. Important as we thought it is for our nationhood and for our history and culture, it didn't create no waves in the public. What we felt would have created significant interest was, one, the Charter of Rights, which I consider to be the most important of the recommendations that came out. And thankfully we were able to implement that some years ago. But other things like entrenching the Electoral Commission, entrenching provisions for the impeachment of public officials, that we felt would cause people to say, yes, I want that, because if public officials are involved in corruption, I want to punish them. Ought we not to be focusing on those things and going to the people and saying, no, look, this is what we are proposing. Let's have a discussion and to say exactly how it should work. Maybe you have ideas as to how it should work better, rather than having it as an open-ended thing. But
it's not open-ended, though, Mr. Golding. You're using that language, but I mean, what I just outlined is not an open-ended process.
Mm.
And I know you were asking, Bobby, so beg pardon. But really, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, what is the nature of the governance structure that we want for the next 60 years? We have an executive and a legislature that has big overlap, right? Has that served us well? Has it served us well to have elected representatives also make up the ministers? Or have we found that when we do that, we don't see them in the MP, because the MP is now a very busy minister? So do we want to change that? Do we want to have a different structure?
But
do
Carol,
we want to elect our president?
But Carol,
so governance structure matters, because right now huge power is concentrated in very few hands.
Yes.
Right?
But follow me now, Carol, Robert. One of the issues that has come up in the discussions at the level of the public, social media and so on, is that we should have an elected Senate. People shouldn't be just appointed. They must go to the people and the people must endorse them. Now, whatever criticism we have of Norman Manley and his crew that put together the 61 Constitution, they had a couple of things in their minds that are important. What if you had an elected Senate where you had the JLP controlling 49 seats in the lower house, and out of the 21 in the Senate, they control 16 or 18? You know what could have happened to this country?
I think, however, that we're jumping way ahead of everything. In my opinion, agreed that there need to be parameters, okay? And there needs to be education about each chapter in our Constitution. But there is no approach to bring the public to the table. What has been happening is that you set up a committee of 15 people who are meeting behind closed doors. We don't get even minutes of these meetings. We don't know what's happening. I mean, even when you look at some of the subcommittees of Parliament, they have open meetings. There are minutes of the meetings. You can watch the proceedings. You can get involved. This is a far more important thing than a subcommittee of Parliament.
I agree with you 100%. And I said that to the minister when she was here a few minutes ago.
Yeah, it's happening.
There's no reason why the meeting should not be open to the public.
Absolutely. And we need to have more education about what is in the current Constitution and what you're contemplating changing.
Agreed.
Many people I talk to on the street don't even see the connection between the Constitution and their everyday lives.
Yes.
People don't realize that the whole thing of this fundamental rights is included in the Constitution, and we need to understand what they are.
Carol.
The students at every university and every school in Jamaica should be debating these issues. The headmasters and the principals and all that need to get involved. Get
Carol,
the students involved.
Let us say we did all of what you are saying and what Robert is saying. We had a robust public education program. We used every social media. We informed the people. And eventually...
but we're not talking about informing only, though, because the information model is problematic.
Yeah.
You're talking about informing for a purpose.
Yes.
I.e., giving people the information they need in order to make their choices based on knowledge, right? Based on information, based on data, etc. So you're trying to get
not only that,
decision.
Not only that, but to get their views before you put the matter to them. Finally, for a decision. Right.
So absolutely.
What I'm saying is, I'm not just being cynical. I'm being practical. You do all of that, and you set a date. The 24th of September is the day when this referendum is going to be held. What do you think is likely to be the voter participation level?
But it depends on
far more than if you do not involve the people. Let us recognize that the last election
we'll get to 20%?
we only had 37% of the people voting.
Yeah.
Right? One of the reasons is because people feel totally disconnected from the process.
Yes.
Right? They are not educated about the process. They are not involved. They are not invited to participate. Why do you think people are just throwing up their hands and saying, look, whether we participate or not, it don't matter, because the man, them up in the big place, them decides everything about this.
I don't want you to misunderstand me, I'm not suggesting that we don't do all of these things. I'm just being as practical as I can. And I believe that if we are not to waste time, one of the fears I have is that we're going through an exercise in futility. And I suggested to the minister, and she seemed to have taken me on board, that there needs to be some discussion between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition as to what they are both prepared to countenance, no? Because if they don't at least set a framework of issues on which they are prepared to reach some kind of consensus, then there's no point in even going to the people. If the opposition maintains, as I interpret from what the opposition leader said in Parliament 2 weeks ago, that unless the CCJ matter is dealt with, there's not much chance of any consensus, then quite frankly, we're wasting time. So I really believe that a frank discussion needs to be held to see whether or not there is a basis on which we can proceed. Don't spend a lot of money. Bringing this Canadian guy here must be costing taxpayers a lot of money, no? Don't waste a lot of taxpayers' money in an exercise in futility. Determine how we're going to proceed, what is possible, what is doable, and then let us determine the program now to go to the people, to inform them, to hear from them, to try and arrive at some consensus, and then sign off on it in Parliament so that it can go to the people in a vote.
Hold on, we totally agree with that. But what has happened is that the committee has said we are going to the Parliament by the end of May with a bill.
I don't believe that's going to happen.
Well, let me tell you something. I believe that if it were not for some of us raising our voices, it would have happened. We have to raise our voices.
Yes, I heard last week that the phase one is going to be, what's the word, elasticized? It's not going to happen.
Mr. Golding, may I?
Yes, sure, Carol.
Yes, the model you are describing is the old model of decision making. It is the model in which the two parties have constructed the nature of the country and governance that we will have, and then say to the people, this is what we have constructed, vote on it. Now, what is being said now is that we have an opportunity for the designers of the nation that we want to not just be the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister and the however many members of Parliament that there are. Because otherwise, we are recreating something that leaves the majority of people feeling out on the margin, feeling as if what is the point of voting and participating because the decision's done already, and so on. So it's really, if we want a shift in the extent to which the citizens of Jamaica feel as if Jamaica belongs to them, feel as if their voice matters, and as if their opinion counts, feel as if this is their country in which they get to decide how it's structured, how resources are expended, who is put in positions of power over us, how they get there, how we move them if we're not satisfied, how we hold them to account if they're doing wrong things that we feel, they need to be held account for. All of these, if we don't get a chance to do that,
Carl,
if this is like 1962.
Carl, I can't disagree with you, I can't disagree with you. But I mean, I have practical experience, right? We agreed in 1995 on a Charter of Rights. When I tried to move that forward in the early part of my administration, I was blocked. I was told by a senior opposition member that we're not going with the Charter of Rights unless we deal with the CCJ. Eventually, it was a discussion that I had with Mrs. Portia Simpson Miller herself. And I said, no, this Charter of Rights is so important. It's far more important than any CCJ. Can we just move on that? Because all that needs is a 2/3 majority in the Senate. And eventually we were able to do it. What I'm saying is, I hear you, but have all the consultation you want. The way in which the Constitution is now structured, unless both sides agree, nothing moves. So what I'm saying is some discussion, we can't isolate them. We can't go write something out at some town hall meetings and hand to them, because unless they agree, nothing moves.
And I agree with you. However, the way that the whole thing is structured now was not calling on us to be participants at the grassroots level. It was just a matter of a group of 15 making a decision and going to Parliament with a bill.
Can't fault you on that, Robert. Can't fault you on that. I think the process was weak.
Absolutely. And up to now, we still don't have any clear understanding of what their thinking is.
We should have learned,
But
I mean,
could I
the
also
1995, the 1993-94 commission, chaired by James Carr and then by Lloyd Barnett, they went to every parish, If truth be told,
and only 17 of the 49, Mr. Golding, only 17 of the 49 recommendations that came up from the people were taken on board.
Yes.
And those recommendations were mostly the rights-related ones.
Yes.
Nothing that had to do with us changing our political structure was taken on board. Why is that, you suppose? Nothing that had to do with impeachment. Nothing that had to do with fixed election dates. Nothing that had, and I could go down the list.
Yes.
None of that got taken on because both parties have a vested interest in the existing political model and structures because it vests power almost entirely in their hands.
But in fairness, impeachment, for example, there was agreement on that. There was agreement. But in order,
never happened with it. Nothing.
No, but in order for it to be done, Section 49 has to be amended. Section 49 can only be amended by way of a referendum.
And the two parties have differed on those things because it don't suit them to change it, Mr. Golding, unless there is public demand.
Yes.
For a menu of things that we say we want prioritized now, we will get the same old with some tinkering on the edge, right? And yes, we may get some,
Well, I believe
the monarch will be done away with, but the essential power structure will remain intact.
Well,
and
Carol,
the voice of the people will be way around the back.
Carol, if you ask me, doing away with the monarch is way down on my list of priorities, you know.
But it's no longer
but we agree with you.
Because the truth of the matter is,
nation.
neither the Queen Elizabeth nor Prince Charles nor King Charles really, none of them don't interfere with me.
Right, but Mr.
I am
Golden,
concerned about, as you say, things like impeachment.
right.
I'm concerned about making sure that no government, I don't know which
Yes.
government that may end up with the idea that
Yes.
this electoral commission is a nuisance and decide to go to, they could
Exactly.
within 1 week they could bring a bill and pass a
Quite
bill to
true.
abolish the electoral commission.
Quite so.
Precisely.
Right.
So we need to, that needs to be in the Constitution
Yes.
as
And
an institution.
As well as the integrity commission.
Integrity
But also,
Commission as well.
But also, it's important to see how the pulse of the people has changed over time. Now, in the country, there has been much more a much more popular view of it's time to end the monarchy. It tied to the conversations about reparations, etc., etc. But there is a stronger push than would have been in existence in '95. There is a greater agreement in the society for that. So if that's something we can agree on, let us do so, and then let us recognize that it requires us to now be the architects of what will be the governance structure.
The conversation has to continue. The advocacy, which both of you
Yes.
represent so strongly, has to continue as well. We're at the end of the
It
program.
does.
Thank you so much, both
Thank you
Robert
too.
Stevens and Carol Narcisse. Robert from the Advocates Network, Carol from the Jamaica Accountability Meetup Portal, who joined
Thank you,
us on
Mr.
the
Dole.
conversation.
Thank you very
Good
much.
afternoon to your listeners.
Well, we've been discussing constitutional reform today. We had a variety of guests on the program who hopefully gave you a better understanding of what is at stake, what are the interests that you need to give serious consideration to, and what your own response and engagement and involvement ought to be. That's the end of the program for this week, 1st of May, start of a new month. We hope to be back next week, Monday, where we do it all over again. We find a topic, we try and assemble some people who can help us to delve into it and get a better understanding of it. Do it all over again. Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Have a good week.